Welcome to church this morning. Just thank you guys. It was your giving that allowed that plane to be refurbished so that what? So that this congregation can put 15 people on a plane and fly across the world anywhere we want and plant a church and then go to another place. And that's what it's for. It's about missions, and we just want to thank you because it wouldn't be there. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for your giving. And so we are in a series here that we've been doing on Saturday nights called The Last Days on Fallen Earth. This is number 4. We're going through the book of Daniel. And I'm going to try to catch you up a little bit. We're going to be in chapter 2 this week, but I just want to open with prayer. And Lord, we know that you are the healer, you are the deliverer, you are the redeemer. You are behind the Shekinah glory. You are behind signs and wonders. You are behind breakthroughs and a special kind of wisdom and a special kind of peace. But we know that you have an army that puts that into enactment, that works directly for you. And the Bible's very clear with the angels. So we loose these angels around this sanctuary. And each of them have a job. If there's angels to protect, if there's angels for wisdom, there's angels that operate in deliverance, angels that operate in healing, angels that operate in the Shekinah glory, in the glory of God, in breakthrough. And so we command them to go to work. We put them in this building today. In Jesus' mighty name, amen. Last week we went through Daniel chapter 1 on Saturday night. And just a little bit quick review. We got into Daniel being deported out of his home country as a teenager into a foreign culture. And he committed himself to maintain faithfulness to his heritage, his background, his relationship with God. And let me give you a little background on the timeline. Nineveh at that time was the capital of the Assyrian Empire. Remember that's the city that Jonah dealt with. And Nineveh fell in 612 BC to the Babylonians. In 609 BC, the Pharaoh of Egypt, his name was Necho, led an army against the Assyrian Empire to put them away. This was the last remnants of the Assyrian Empire. 3 years later, a young general by the name of Nebuchadnezzar, a very talented general. He was also the son of the sitting king of Babylon at the time named Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was Nebuchadnezzar's father. Nebuchadnezzar defeats the last remaining adversary in the Egyptians. So we have the Assyrian Empire go down. The Babylonians then defeat Egypt in a famous historical battle called Karsh-Amish. And it was on the west bank of the Euphrates, and that establishes this little city-state called Babylon, which was previously a vassal state and a pawn of the Assyrian Empire. So Babylon becomes the dominant factor in the region. Nebuchadnezzar, on his way back from that famous battle with the Egyptians, besieges Jerusalem. And we talked about last week how it was actually 3 different sieges of Jerusalem. And I'm trying to give you the big picture here. During the first siege of Jerusalem, Nebuchadnezzar discovers that his father, the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, has died. So he's now not just a prominent general of the army, but he's now the king of Babylon. He has to go home, take over the throne. But what we have to understand as we go into chapter 2 is we have this young guy who's taking over the kingship of what you could say is the known world, the empire at that time, and he inherits all these advisors / cronies that advised his father. And he doesn't know if they have real capability or if they're just a bunch of con artists. And he's going to put them to the test here in chapter 2. Nebuchadnezzar's father, Nebuchadnezzar, ruled Babylon from 627 to 605 BC. Welcome to Living Word Bible School. By the way, it's the 9 a.m. Nebuchadnezzar reigns from 605 BC to 562 BC. Remember, we're counting backwards when it's before Christ was born. And we'll talk about Nebuchadnezzar's descendants when we get into chapter 5 later in the series. But the book of Daniel has 12 chapters. The first 6 chapters are historical narratives. And the chapters 7 through 12, you have an appendix of the visions of Daniel. These visions are not in chronological order, and we'll deal with that when we get there. Chapter 2 consists of a history-changing dream that Nebuchadnezzar the king has. Something very interesting about Daniel is Daniel wrote the book of Daniel in Hebrew, except chapters 2 through 7, which he wrote in Aramaic. It was the Gentile language of the day. And it's really interesting because chapters 2 through 7 just happen to focus on Gentile history in a way you won't see it in any other part of the Bible. The Bible generally deals with history, both past and future, through the lens of the nation of Israel. But in chapters 2 through 7, we have a situation where God is laying out the history of the Gentile world through Nebuchadnezzar's reign all the way to the Antichrist. And that period is called by the disciple Luke the times of the Gentiles in Luke 21:24. Daniel 2 verse 1, in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams wherewith his spirit was troubled and his sleep brake from him. From the grammar here, some scholars believe it was multiple dreams that he had. Daniel 2:2, then the king commanded to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans, for to show the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. You can go through the commentaries on each one of these terms in the Aramaic: magicians, astrologers, sorcerers, Chaldeans. These guys have their job descriptions, but they overlap. Most competent expositors point out they overlap so much they're used as generics. Some of these guys are necromancers. Some of these guys are astrologers, magicians, but these are the king's advisors. And these are the staff people that advise him directly. Most of them are heavily involved in the occult. Just to talk about the meaning of the Chaldeans here in verse 2, it's a general term for the region. In most cases, we went over this last week about Chaldea. Chaldean can be what you would call a Californian here or a Texan here. But it also is used as a title of one of these job descriptions for these guys. The Chaldean culture was very much into the occult. So in verse 2, we just read, he calls his top staff guys together. Daniel 2:3, the king said unto them, I've dreamed a dream. My spirit was troubled to know that dream, know the dream. Then spake the Chaldeans to the king of Syriac, O king, live forever. Tell thy servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the thing is gone from me. If you will not make known unto me this dream with the interpretation, I'm going to cut you in pieces, and your houses shall be made a dunghill. Notice he said the dream is gone from me. A lot of scholars are divided on the fact that if he can't remember the dream or not. Some scholars believe, and I'm not a scholar, but I believe that he was faking that. He knew what he dreamed. He wanted to find out if his father's advisors could really cut it, or he could have been looking for an excuse altogether to get rid of them. Because if he tells them the dream, they can just make up an interpretation. So notice in verse 5, he's explaining to them his new staff development program. He says if they don't interpret the dream, he's going to cut them to pieces and turn their homes into dunghills. So they've got to tell him the dream, and then they have to interpret it. We talked about last week, Nebuchadnezzar is not a guy that makes idle threats. His total reign is characterized by the fact that he's an absolute brutal despot. And secular history records Nebuchadnezzar as roasting his officers over fires when he was a general if they failed in a mission. Nebuchadnezzar took the last king of Jerusalem, Zedekiah, after it was conquered, killed his children in front of him, and after that put both of his eyes out and dragged him back to Babylon. And throws him in prison. Interestingly enough, when you get to the Persian Empire, which has a part in this book. Those kings don't do that. They can't change the laws on a whim like the Babylonians could. The Persians operated very differently, and that's been confirmed archaeologically. Daniel 2:6. But if you show the dream, this is the king, and the interpretation, you shall receive of me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore, show me the dream and the interpretation. They answered and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. The king answered, said, I know of certainty you would gain the time, because you see the thing is gone from me. But if you will not make known unto me the dream, there is but one decree for you, for you have prepared lying and corrupt words to speak before me, till the time be changed. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that ye can show me the interpretation. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, there's not a man upon the earth that can show the king's matter. Therefore, there is no king, lord, or ruler that asks such things of any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. So they're telling the king he's outrageous. And the king, Daniel 2:11, it is a rare thing the king requireth, and there is none other that can show it before the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with one flesh. There's one God that can show him. And verse 12, and for this cause the king was angry, furious, and commanded to destroy all the wise men in Babylon. So we have the king Nebuchadnezzar just eliminating a job description. Well, Daniel is in this category. He's in this job description. Let's look at verse 13. And the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain. They sought Daniel and his fellows to be slain. He's not present for this, which says he's lower on the totem pole in that department, because he didn't even get invited to the meeting. Daniel 2:14, then Daniel answers with counsel and wisdom to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, which was gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. Just to point out, the captain of the king's guard is also the captain of the executioners. Verse 15, he answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree so hasty from the king? And Arioch made the thing known to Daniel, explained to him what was going on. Verse 16, then Daniel went in, desired of the king that would give him time, that he would show the king the interpretation. Daniel goes to his house, made the thing known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions. And notice that they would desire, he's like, pray with me. Notice they prayed for mercy first. If you don't have faith for something, pray for mercy. Mercy's always there. It's not something that you have to be a certain place with. Just know that he's healed on his mercy alone. And so, he goes to he says in verse 18, they would desire the mercies of God, of heaven, concerning this secret, that Daniel and his fellows should not perish with the rest of the wise men. So we've got Daniel and his buddies who are actually Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That is their Persian names. What we read in the verse are their Hebrew names, and are caught up in this thing, this decree. This decree is a done deal. God has to show them this dream that the king had. So they went to the Lord. They entreated with the Lord. Think about the setbacks that we face on a daily basis. Work, family, children. Kind of makes them pale compared to this. Is life and death. 19, this was the secret revealed unto Daniel in a night vision. Secret, God revealed it to him. And then Daniel immediately blessed the God of heaven. Do you know you can bless God? Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Daniel 20, Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. We have Daniel writing that he blessed the God of heaven. And God gave the credit, in a sense, he gave God the credit, in a sense, the glory for the wisdom he received. One thing that you will see with Daniel, you always see him praying before anything. He prays after everything. Half the book is him praying. In essence, just talking to God. In chapter 9, he even gets his prayers interrupted by an angel, Gabriel. Gabriel gives him the most 4 incredible verses in the Bible. In chapter 9, I'm getting ahead of myself. In verse 21, He's just praising God. He changed the names of times and seasons. He removes kings, sets up kings. He giveth wisdom unto the wise and knowledge to them that know understanding. He revealeth the deep and secret things. He knoweth what is in the darkness, and the light dwelleth with him. I thank thee, I praise thee, O God of my fathers, who has given me wisdom and might, and has made known unto me now what we desired of thee. For thou hast made known unto us the king's matter. So think about this. All these magicians, necromancers, wise men, advisors of the king, of the greatest empire of the world, and this 25-year-old gets it in one night. They can't get it. I would call this the second biggest upstage in the Bible. He's pretty young. A lot of scholars think he's about 25 years old. Verse 24, therefore Daniel went into Arioch, who the king had ordained to destroy the wise men. He went and said unto him, destroy not the wise men of Babylon. Bring me in before the king, and I will show unto the king the interpretation. So it's Daniel's initiative to go to Arioch, who's a mid-level advisor. But Arioch's obviously a bureaucrat. And I'm sure you see a form of this in your life at your work, bureaucratic behavior, people that want to take the credit. Verse 25, then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king and said unto him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah that will make known the king the interpretation. Notice Arioch has said, I have found a man. So you've got Arioch making it sound as his own heroics. He was able to identify the resource for the king. Verse 26, the king answered and said unto Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar, that is his Persian name. And don't confuse that with Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. Daniel's still around for Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. His name is Belshazzar. It's a different, similar names, but people confuse them. Daniel's Persian name is Belteshazzar. Art thou able to make known unto me the dream which I have seen and the interpretation? Now, Belteshazzar, that's his Babylonian name. So the king says, can you tell me the dream? I want you to notice in the next two verses from here how carefully Daniel answers this question. He's very pointed in trying to give credit to where credit is due. This is big for your own life. It will take you a long way if you give God glory for every positive thing that happens for you. God gave me 2 state championships, just giving him glory all the way. I didn't know anything. All the way. I don't care how stupid it sounds. I don't care if you're on TV and you got to do it. Daniel 2:27, Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king had demanded, cannot the wise men, these guys have got to be in the back of the room here because their lives are on the line. Cannot the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers show the king? He's pointing that out. Daniel 2:28, but there is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets and maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. This is a very key phrase right here. Latter days, thy dream and thy visions of thy head upon thy bed are these. So looking at 28, there's a God in heaven that revealeth secrets. There's just a side note, there's a New Testament prayer for Christians to pray for themselves and other Christians. In Ephesians 1, talks about secrets. I always pray to the God of my Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of glory, that you would grant unto us the spirit of wisdom and revelation, insight into mysteries and secrets, and the deep and intimate knowledge of you. He'll give you secrets if you will ask. It's a promise. That's a promise. And then he says, make known to the king what shall be known in the latter days. This tells us right here what the subject of the dream is. It's on the latter days. The purpose of the dream is to show the king what's going to happen in the latter days. Verse 29, he goes into the dream. As for thee, O king, thy thoughts came unto thy mind upon thy bed, which should come to pass hereafter. And he that revealeth secrets maketh known to thee what shall come to pass. But as for me," again, he's pointing to the Lord, "the secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have more than any living, but for their sake shall make known the interpretation to the king." I think he's pointing to the back. For their sakes. Keeps reminding them that they couldn't do this. "And that thou mightest know the thoughts of thy heart. Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image. The great image whose brightness was excellent stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible." The word terrible means awesome. It doesn't mean what we think terrible means in the English. And the closest translation is really awesome. And as I'm reading these scriptures, I want to show you this image from top to bottom. I've got a couple of different things to look at. And I know that I've gone over this with Saturday night weeks ago. But for the sake of Sunday morning, trying to catch you up, and I've also got new information on these images that I never talked about in the last sermon when we covered this vision. I'm just letting you know we're going to go through the chapter. We have 17 verses left. If we could show that first image, the golden image, the first image. It's not all gold. It's made of different metals. Verse 32 and 33, this is what the king saw in his dream. This image's head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly of thighs of brass, his legs of iron, and his feet part of iron and part of clay. So you've got gold, silver, brass, and iron. The feet are iron that is impure iron because it's mixed with clay. I just want to point out from head to feet, these different materials degenerate in value as they go down the body, but they increase in strength if you leave out the feet of iron with the mixture of clay. Verse 34, "Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were iron of clay." Hit this stone, hits the feet, breaks it into pieces. Then was the iron, clay, brass, silver, and the gold broken to pieces together and became like the chaff of summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away. No place was found in them. The stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. Thou, O king, art the king of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee power. He's given you your kingdom and strength and glory. Notice Daniel tells King Nebuchadnezzar that the God gave him his kingdom, his power, his strength and glory. And really that has all to do with Israel. That was in dealing with Israel. He's making the point to Nebuchadnezzar that all this power that he has is not his achievement. And this will come to a crisis as we get into chapter 4, Daniel 2:28. "And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field, the fowls of heaven, hath he given thee." All these, everything is yours, but he gave it to you. "And he made you ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold," he says. So I want to put the second image up of this image. It's kind of broken down into what it means of Nebuchadnezzar's dreams. These images are copyrighted, so you should be able to see these online. You can see the head of gold, the arms of chest of silver, the belly and thighs of brass, legs of iron, and then you have the feet that are iron mixed with clay. And as you can see, the stone down there in the corner of this picture smites the feet and blows it away. You have a mountain growing from that scene, and it fills the entire world. And there's a direction I want to go here that I did not talk about when I preached this part of this weeks ago. That you have to understand if you're going to put all this in the Bible together. So we know that Daniel identifies the head of gold as Babylon. And then you get the succeeding empires that follow. You have Persia, Greece, the Roman Empire, and then what you have some call the revised Roman Empire, the 10 kingdoms, where the Antichrist conquers 3 of them and the other 7 give themselves to him. After they see the ease that and the ferocity and destruction that he puts on these three countries. And if you go back to number 1 in this series of this message, we actually pinpointed down to what a lot of scholars think those actual three countries are. You see, the Medo-Persians conquered the Babylonians. So you can see that they are the silver, they are next down. Then you have the Greeks conquering the Medo-Persians. And Greece, even though it was split into 4 different parts, after Alexander the Great died, it was divided into his 4 generals. Eventually, Rome conquers all that territory. But I need to point something out. No one ever conquered the Roman Empire. Rome disintegrates into pieces. And as you can see, the legs of iron represent Rome. But then Rome is regathered in the latter days, not with Rome as the capital. We're literally watching this happen, if you're paying attention in the world today, starting from the top at the head. Hopefully, we still have that second image up. Babylon, from 606 to 539, you can see, you guys are realizing this dream is being interpreted. It's calling what happens in the future. This is during the Babylonian Empire. Persians came around in 539 and went from 3 to 332. The Persians conquered Babylon, but they did not destroy it. And we'll read about that in Daniel 5. So we have Persia ruling for 2 centuries. They made Babylon their secondary capital. Then we had, in many ways, an extraordinary, some think, young man in Alexander, who conquered the world before he was 29 years old, then fell on his bed crying because there were no more worlds left to conquer. That's documented. Poor guy. Alexander conquered the Persians, and that's why he ruled a very short time. He made Babylon his capital. His 4 generals divided up the Greek Empire, and then finally in 68 BC, all that Greece had gained in the end fell to Rome. And really, if you want to get technical, no individual nation ever conquered Rome. We'll deal more with that later. We left off in verse 38, where Daniel called Nebuchadnezzar, i.e. the Babylonian Empire, the head of gold. So just to be clear, verse 39 and 40, and after these shall rise another kingdom, inferior to thee. The Persians had more land. It was a bigger empire. But as far as just prominence, it was inferior because the Persians oftentimes had to deal with 2 rulers. They had a Mede and a Persian. They didn't have absolute power like the Babylonians. Kings just said whatever they had happened. So the Persians a lot of times had to split power. So that's why it was a little inferior in the way they were run. Another 3rd kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the 4th kingdom shall be strong as iron, for much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things. As iron that breaketh all these shall it break in pieces and bruise. Cyrus the Great of the Persian Empire would conquer a country, and he prided himself on absorbing that culture without destroying it. And then a lot of times he let the slaves go. I mean, he's the one who sends the Hebrews back to Israel and actually raised money for them to build the temple. He was enlightened, very enlightened ruler. The Greeks did the same thing. They would try to raise the cultural standards. Many times they didn't make people change religions and worship their gods. Verse 40, the 4th kingdom shall be strong as iron. Talks about breaking into pieces, subdues all things. Breaking in pieces again, bruising. And just as we're talking about in this 4th empire, breaking into pieces, the Romans, they prided themselves on what they could destroy. They loved it. They took pride in destroying the sacred things of other cultures. And going back to Babylon, which is represented by the head of gold on the statue, they're going to be conquered by an alliance. Cyrus the Great had mixed parents. One was Persian and one was Median. So Cyrus was the one that pulls these two people groups together, and they were powerful. And that's why some people call it the Medo-Persian Empire. He conquers Babylon. The Persian Empire gets larger than the Babylonian Empire. And the Persian Empire is represented on the statue as the breast and arms of silver. The Persians are conquered by Alexander the Great. And the Greeks, they're represented in Nebuchadnezzar's dream on the statue as the belly and thighs of brass. And the Greeks go all the way into India under Alexander the Great. He dies at the age of 32. When he dies, his top 4 generals this is all in the Bible. It calls history, secular history, hundreds of years in advance. Hundreds of years in advance, he's calling history. And I do not have symptoms, but when I preach, after about 30 minutes, my nose has started running. You know that about me, if you've heard me. Okay, you have Cassandra. I block it with chapstick, but sometimes it overruns the little dam of chapstick. You have Cassandra, who took this general's name is Cassander, one of them, top 4 generals. Antigonus, this is backed up by history, but 2 of the most powerful generals that took his empire were Ptolemy takes the south and Seleucus takes the east. And really the dynasties of Ptolemy in the south and Seleucus in the east, and then their descendants, these empires stuck around, deal with history until Rome rises. Ptolemy and Seleucus have most of their contests and wars, their battles and wars in this little buffer zone, which is today called Israel. Now, when Ptolemy and Seleucus are going at it and their descendants after them, this covers a period of time in the Bible scholars call the silent years, the years between the Old and the New Testaments. But here's the thing. What happens in that area of the world is written in advance. It's being written right now. This is hundreds of years before Ptolemy and Seleucus. And when you get into Daniel 11, it tells all about them. It tells every battle they had. The king of the north, king of the south, it talks about, and it details the secular history. It's making the calls hundreds of years in advance. And so the so-called liberal scholars out there say that this proves that Daniel had to be written later by someone else that already saw everything that happened. And the problem is these liberal scholars are assaulted by the facts. As we talked about last week, Daniel was translated into the Greek Old Testament. It was a book already 3 centuries before the Gospels period, before Jesus even showed up. It was already in the Greek language 300 years. The Old Testament. Daniel was already written and being passed around the world. The whole Old Testament was. It's called the Septuagint. Is what it's called. So those 400 years between the Old and the New Testament are detailed in the book of Daniel. And I'm talking about the silent years. What I'm getting at is you can see all the battles between Ptolemy and Seleucus. You'll see all these guys. They call them king of the south, king of the north. They're fighting each other, and it all happens, and it lines up, Daniel 11 lines up with secular history like a T. Oh, it's all coincidence. Someone wrote it later. That's what they say. Someone wrote it later that knew what happened. Nothing's that accurate. It would be the equivalent of someone prophesying hundreds of years in advance all the battles of the Revolutionary War and saying who won, who lost, and where they happened. And so I'm just trying to get across to you how precise Bible prophecy is in a lot of cases. Daniel 2:40, the 4th kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces, this is Rome here. Okay? And we all know what succeeded the Greek Empire was the original Roman Empire, which is represented by the legs of iron. And we'll talk more about this when we get to Daniel 7. Daniel 2:41, and whereas thou sawest the feet and the toes, part of potter's clay, part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, and there shall be in it of the strength of iron, for as much as we sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. This is so interesting right here. The phrase, the kingdom shall be divided, in verse 41 means fragmented. Rome was not conquered by a succeeding empire. It was broken into a bunch of little pieces over hundreds of years, all right? And we know from history, Each of those pieces had their day in the sun. The Dutch had a little empire. The Germans were up a couple of times. The French had their day even after Napoleon. The Spanish had their day. The British had a little empire, but none of them equaled the four that we're talking about. Daniel 2:42, and the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong. Whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. Okay, shall mingle themselves. They shall. It calls them they. Who's they? But they shall not cleave to one another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. Let me ask you in verse 43, iron was mixed with miry clay. Most conservative expositors think that represents people. Got God as the potter. A lot of examples of that in the Bible. But there's some interesting things here. Number one is the fact that it was written in Aramaic and not Hebrew. Miry clay is clay made from dust. Dust is idiomatic of death. And then you have the next phrase, after iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. Well, who's they then? They're obviously not men. Notice when he's talking about this miry, and this is about the 10 kingdoms. This is him regarding what's going on with the Antichrist. So who is they? It represents a group. And that means that the they has to be something other than the seed of men. I want to give you a quick, brief view, and you can take your opinion out of this. It's a snapshot view. We're taking a little side trail, but it's something that it's imperative that you understand if you're going to put the Bible together. This is the traditional view of the ancient rabbis. This is the traditional view of the early church in the New Testament. There are some modern theories that are popular with seminaries that are completely and clearly unscripturally and wrong. And so he's talking about that they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. Miry clay is made of dust. The context of the dream implies whoever they are constitute a significant political constituency. We're not talking about a 1% fringe. We're talking about something that's meaningful enough to keep this particular empire of the feet mixed with iron and clay from gaining the strength that it's seeking. One possibility, I don't want to get too much into, is cloning. Because it's not, we are messing with the human gene pool today. I mean, the World Economic Forum, who's trying to set this world into a one world government, is talking about printing out organs. You will no longer need a donor. We're going to print it. That means you're not fully human. And I don't want to talk about that, but we're not going to head down that channel. When Jesus was giving a snapshot or briefing of his second coming, that's in Matthew 24 and 25, he makes a remark, as the days of Noah were, so shall the coming of man be. To understand that remark by Jesus, you have to understand what the days of Noah were like. We know they were sinful, but there's something I want to point out. Genesis 6. 1 and 2, this is all one sentence for a reason. Came to pass when man began to multiply on the face of the earth, the daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and took them wives of all which they chose. Remember, I'm trying to explain who the they are. What is this they constituting our time is what that dream is about. So they got men. You've got men in general, daughters in general. They're people. So these characters in verse 2 took the daughters of men because they were fair. We're not talking about Sethites. We're not talking about Canaanites. We're talking about just daughters, women. Who are the sons of God? Ben Elohim is the Hebrew. In the Hebrew is the word. It is the term in the Old Testament that is invariably used for angels. The term refers to a direct creation of God. The word sons of God means it's a direct creation. You and I are not direct creations. We're not of God. We are born again. We are regenerated. Adam and Eve were direct creations of God. The angels are direct creations of God. And so they're called Ben Elohim throughout the Old Testament. It's always the term used for angels. Hebrew scholars in the 3rd century translate to understand that these were angels. So they saw the daughters of men, and that's translated Banath Adam in the Hebrew. These are not daughters of Cain. They're not daughters of Seth. They're daughters of men in general, and they are daughters of Adam, which is part of the Hebrew word Banath Adam. And the reason I'm going to go into this detail here, because modern exposition has twisted this to mean, in the seminaries, something a little less uncomfortable here. And I'm actually talking about the seminaries. And it's not scriptural what they teach. Genesis 6:4, there were giants in the earth in those days. In the days, what days? Days of Noah. Look at the next phrase. And also after that. And also after that, after the days of Noah, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, these angels, and the children became mighty men, which were old men, men of renown. This word is Nephilim in the Hebrew. Notice it says in verse 4, and also after that. That means there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men. This was not just before the flood. And the primary reason of the flood of Noah, it was to deal with the issue of the human blood being tainted by the fallen angels. There were incidents subsequent to the flood, and people overlooked that. The Nephilim in the Hebrew comes from the word nephal. Means fallen ones, to fall, to be cast down. What, out of heaven maybe? To fall away, to desert. These are fallen angels that came into the daughters of men, or they are products of the fallen angels and the daughters of men. In the Greek, they were translated giganteous, which means earthborn. Genesis 6:9, these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations. The word perfect in the Hebrew is the word tamim. It means without blemish, without spot. His generations, it means were unimpaired. It's saying Noah's blood had not been tainted by the Nephilim, the fallen ones. Their blood was not in his bloodline. It's saying Noah's bloodline was pure, just human. Satan was trying to corrupt the human gene pool by tainting the human blood to prevent a Messiah. This view is confirmed 3 times in the New Testament. Let the Bible interpret the Bible. Any Bible school will tell you that. Welcome to Living Word Bible School. What's commonly taught in many seminaries is what's called the line of Seth view. It's absolutely not scriptural. And what these liberal scholars are arguing is the bloodlines of Seth, which were good, and the bloodlines of Cain, which were bad, and they should have never been intermarried. That's how they're trying to explain away Genesis 6:1 and 2. And it's impossible to prove because it's totally unscriptural. The fallen angel view prevails among conservative scholars today. Most importantly, it's confirmed by Jude, the brother of Jesus, Peter, and Paul. Confirm it. Oh, it's not coincidental that we find legends of the same thing in every ancient culture on the planet Earth. Think about this. Assyria, Egypt, the Incas, the Mayans, the Persians, the Greeks. Think about Greek mythology. It's all about gods and demigods. The demigods were called titans. In Hebrew, they would be called Nephilim. Even the Sioux Indians in America had legends. They called them the star people that came and commingled with the daughters of men. Buffalo Bill, even in his autobiography, makes mention of these episodes that were legends of the Sioux Indians. Look at Atlas, look at Hercules. They were Nephilim. They were byproducts. They were hybrids between the gods and the daughters of men. Achilles was half God, half man. The early church fathers held these views. If you go through all the big names in modern scholarship today, these views are held that I'm preaching to you about. The reason I'm emphasizing this is you'll not understand a lot of what's going on in the Old Testament post-flood history until you understand the Raphaim we're talking about the Nephilim, the giants, the offspring of the fallen angels coming into the daughters of men. Oh, that's what the 12 spies saw. They went to Jericho. They came back and told Joshua, there's Nephilim over there. That's what they saw. Then we're talking about guys 6'2". I would give anything to be 6'2". People don't understand this is why God was telling Joshua. He often told Joshua, you wipe out every man, woman, child, and interestingly enough, animal in certain tribes because there was a problem in the gene pool. The gene pool had been corrupted by the Nephilim, i.e. fallen angels. In Genesis 3:15, I'm just giving the reference because we're running out short on time. When God announces the seed of the woman, he says to Satan, I'm gonna put enmity between thy seed and her seed. Thy seed? Satan has a seed? What seed? We're talking about the seed. He's announcing the seed of the serpent. The seed, this is where I'm going, who they are in Daniel. The seed of the serpent is sometimes called the red dragon in Revelation 12, i.e. the Antichrist. The coming world leader commonly called the Antichrist. I believe he's alive now and well into his adult years. And then we've got the false prophet that actually causes the world to worship him. These forces are behind the world powers today. And if you go to your Bible, you can watch them play out. First thing they want is a one world government. Daniel 2:44. In these days, these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom. He shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these other kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. For inasmuch as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it break in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass. Here's what he says it, and the dream is certain, and the interpretation is sure. Can we put up the second image of the Nebuchadnezzar dream? As you can see, it's talking about that stone there on the bottom, and it destroys the kingdom of iron mixed with miry clay that mingled them. You can take for they who you want, right? I'm just trying to make you think here. Who's they that mingled themselves with the seed of men? Okay? Because they aren't obviously men. Remember, the Antichrist is extremely gifted, superhuman in a sense. The stone eventually turns into a mountain. He's talking about that dream. He's explaining the dream. The mountain's not going to stand for 1,000 years. It says the mountain stands forever. And you could do your own little study on the concept of a stone being used as a type of Jesus Christ. How many times does a stone or a rock in the Bible represent Jesus? This isn't just some kind of moral lesson Daniel is giving. His words at the end of the verse, the dream is certain, the interpretation sure. This is a concise prophecy of history written in advance. I'm presenting to you what's called the pre-millennial view. There are other views. We've taken some time going down some rabbit trails. This kingdom is yet to be established yet. It is the pre-millennial view. In the pre-millennial view, the stone that breaks the feet of iron and clay into pieces immediately becomes a mountain. Not subtly, not over time. What I'm getting at is the stone that becomes a mountain and refills the earth does not refer to the church. This is a large segment of Christianity believes the church is going to do this and there is not going to be a rapture. The church is going to take over the world. Really? That's what it looks like? The stone is going to come back and destroy this reigning kingdom of the Antichrist in the second coming. This is talking about the second coming. During Christ's time on the earth, the Roman Empire did not have 10 kings. Never had 10 kings. See, these dominionists, they say, that all happened in 70 AD when they destroyed the temple. And Domitian, the emperor, made everyone worship him as a god. And there was actually a form of the mark of the beast, a candle they all had to light. And they couldn't buy anything or sell anything unless they had this. And they're trying to say that the tribulation and all that already happened. And unfortunately, huge ministries are teaching this right now. And it's going to cost people. It's going to cost people because you risk by believing that. By not believing in the rapture, according to my father, in my opinion, is as good as any of these major scholars. If you don't believe in the rapture, and I can't be sure about this, but you're going to be left behind. And you're going to realize real quick, maybe I shouldn't have taken the Seth line of view. Maybe I shouldn't have been a kingdom now dominionist. The stone, which is the Messiah, will crush the 10 kingdoms, which in the end, the Antichrist will own. He will conquer 3 of those 10 countries, and the other 7 give themselves up. And the scripture said that Christ will rule from that point. He's going to have to bring it in with a rod of iron, because you think about, he'll rule with a rod of iron, because you think about, not everybody, just because he's ruling, you'll find out, bows to that. The Bible's very detailed. There's a lot of Christians that believe that it's their job to actually, they are going to usher in the second coming of Jesus. No rapture. Well, I'm not going to be here for that because I'm going in the rapture. And the world, all I've got news for you, is going to get worse and worse from here on out, and the Lord is going to have to straighten it out. The church is not going to straighten it out. Outside of trying to get people to receive Jesus into their hearts, that will become more prevalent with a combination of the latter rain coming, the world getting more and more evil, and people just looking for something, looking for God. And I've got news for you. The Christians are not going to take over the world like most of the church is preaching. These people with this view, it's a large group. You'd be shocked at these preachers. I mean, you see them on TV. They're some of the most prominent people in the nation. They're called Kingdom Now. A lot of them hide it. They don't even want to get into it. I heard one guy, so I don't know what's going to happen in the end. The Bible tells you what's going to happen in the end, okay? They're called dominionists. They call themselves dominionists. I'll tell you that most of those dominionists have no grasp of the role of Israel in God's plan. They're anti-Israel. Daniel 2:46, King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, worshiped Daniel, commanded that they should offer an oblation and sweet odors unto him. The king answered unto Daniel and said, of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldst reveal this secret. Then the king made Daniel a great man, gave him many great gifts, made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, chief of governors over all the wise men. So let's look at that wording. He made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon. That's a whole province. It's not the whole empire. He's ruling an area. Then he made him chief of the governors and over all the wise men in the back of the room. And he makes him his chief of staff. And imagine the problem that causes. Even though he saved these guys, saved their lives. He's now, this 25-year-old is elevated above these advisors. And we'll be talking about that in the beginning of the next chapter. These guys had a death sentence, were bailed out by a 25-year-old, and they're going to come at Daniel and his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, in the next chapter. Last verse, Daniel requested of the king, he didn't leave his buddies behind, that he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. So Daniel sat at the gate of the king. So Daniel's 3 friends get major honors. They were also very gifted. And in phrase 49, Daniel sat in the gate of the king means that he was at the king's court, being the chief of staff. So these jealous necromancers, occultists, magicians, astrologers, sorcerers cultivate a plan that traps these Jewish kids, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, into a situation that puts them into a bad situation. One question I want to answer about chapter 3, and I don't know about next week, because we've got James Tan here, and I've only got 20 minutes. Maybe he'll do the second half. I don't know how that's going to work. We might have to put it off for a week, but Daniel chapter 3, where's Daniel? Has anyone ever wondered that? Where's Daniel during all this? Where's Daniel when chapter 3 is going down and his friends are in big trouble? And so that's one thing we're going to hit either next week or the week after. And so it's just, I'm excited about this series. You know, I'm like obsessed. One of my major prayers when I take communion is make me your addiction. God, make you my addiction. I probably say that 10 times a day. I want to be addicted. And it's interesting because now that I'm into this, I am addicted to this, of finding out everything I can about this. A lot of this I did not know, right? And so we're going to go ahead and we're going to take communion. And as we do, remember, it's communing with God. It's communing with God. And so give me you guys, if those ushers could give me a hand raise like when everybody's handed out, down low and up top, so that we can get into this. But communing with God, if we could put the sculpture up. If we could put that sculpture up. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits. You know that scripture? Why does it tell you not to forget his benefits? So you can have them. If you don't forget them, then there's a possibility of you having them. This is where you get them. This is where it all happened. Either through this or the resurrection. And what I do when I take communion, I commune with God. I look to commune with him at the cross. And what I do is I take that, because I love that sculpture because it's the most real picture out there of what happened, but with your imagination, you can make that so much more real. Because it was a gory, gory sight. And just to sit there and think, wow, a man went through that for me. Went through that for me. Everything starts at the cross. It says in communion to discern my broken body. It doesn't say, look in on yourself and correct everything wrong. What it says, let's look at his words. Don't take it yet. It says, take, eat, this is my body. He says, it was broken for you. Then he says to do this often. And as often as you do this, what does he say? Remember me. He's talking about his broken body. Remember me. Where all your benefits lie, your authority lies. Your peace lies. The chastisement of our peace was upon you. All of it. Healing lies. Deliverance lies at the cross. And so what I do is I discern that. I get pictures of that. Whether if it is the stripes, I do scripture with it that match up with the promises I'm believing for. If I'm believing for healing, or I'm believing for whatever I'm believing for. And so I want to read this. I came across this week, and he just took me there. He said, take communion today out of Psalm 103 is what he said, okay? And I was like, all right, I know those scriptures. And remember, if we go to Psalm 103, and I've got a 26 translation Bible, so I'm going to hit you with a bunch of different versions here. It says, bless the Lord, verse 2, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits. You can ask him for benefits in communion. You're communing with him. You're blessing him while you forget not his benefits. What he gave you, what he went through so you could have them. One translates, bless the Lord, O my soul, remembering all that he has done. All that he has done is part of communing with him, remembering it. Verse 3, he forgives all thine iniquities. He heals all thy diseases. Well, that all happened on the cross. That all happened on the cross. He pardons all thy sins, heals all thy mortal ills. He forgives all your guilt. He heals all your sickness, and forgiving all your offenses and curing all your diseases. He redeemed our lives from destruction, and he crowns thee with loving kindness and tender mercies. The loving kindness is the Old Testament word for grace. Crowns you with grace and mercy. He redeemed your life from the pit, who encompassed thee with loving kindness and tender mercies. He saves your life from death. He crowns you with his love and pity. He redeems your life from the grave. Who crowns you with loving kindness and tender mercies. He satisfies your mouth with good things so that your youth is renewed as eagles. He satisfies your desire with good things so that your youth is renewed as eagles. I just realized that. As many times as I said my youth is renewed as eagles. He satisfies your desires with good things so that your youth is renewed as eagles. It just hit me this week. He satisfies you with good as long as you live, so that your youth is renewed as eagles. He took the bread and he broke it. And he said, take, eat. This is my body that was broken for you. As often as you do this in remembrance of me. And just see him. Sometimes I'm at home and I'm walking up and down the hallway in the dark, and I'm actually swinging the. Just what would that feel like? Hanging there, just getting whipped so others could be healed. Then with the cup, think about this. This cup is a new covenant cup in my blood. Don't drink it yet. It's a new covenant with who? The Ancient of Days. That's the name of God. The Ancient of Days, one of his names. That's what you think of. It's a blood covenant with the Ancient of Days, with Jesus as the intermediary. And it's on the authority of the blood of Jesus. So I take my authority. So just allow me to ruin your communion while we take authority, because it's right here. The blood is behind your authority. The blood is the power of God behind your authority. So as we take communion, as we took this cup, we command the principalities and the powers and the rulers of the darkness of this world, the spiritual wickedness in high places aligned against us, directly or indirectly, behind any weapon being formed against us. I don't care if those weapons are being drawn up, half-made, fully made, you will not prosper, because our righteousness was of the Lord. You desist in your maneuvers against this congregation, against everyone online, against all of our children. Remember, this is redemption. This is redemption, i.e., you're redeemed. This is your righteousness. If he wasn't raised again, you wouldn't be righteous.